Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video for Honeybee Stamps. Today's video is kind of half edited live stream, half new card, and that's because we are going to be looking at watercoloring with distress inks and also watercoloring with distress oxides. In the live stream, you guys actually gave me the idea. I'm working with the Perfect Peonies from Dawn, Woolslagel, and Honeybee, and then also I'm using Monteval watercolor paper that I cut down because I buy them bigger, but you can also use a pre-cut one. I like the cold press watercolor paper from Altenew. And then this is going to be a emboss resist as well as a watercolor kind of card. And that's just because honestly, if you're trying to do a quick watercolor card with like wow results, the easiest way to do that is to heat emboss your image. And that's because you can't watercolor two areas that are next to each other without them merging and kind of making a blob. And so a way that you can do that and be able to watercolor quickly is if you create kind of a dammed edge, and that's what the embossing does. So I have treated my watercolor paper with an anti-static tool, and then I stamped in a white pigment ink, and I am heat embossing with a white detail embossing powder. The detail or the fine embossing powder is best for these types of images, so that you can get all those lovely details that you see in these florals. And then I'm going to heat set this until it is nice and smooth. You don't have to do white. You can do gold, or I mean, you could even stamp it in black and then clear emboss it, like whatever you want to do. You just need to have that heat embossed edge to hold everything apart, to keep everything segregated. So the first one that we're going to do, because this is the one that we did in the live stream, is the Distress ink. Distress ink is what I prefer to Distress Oxide, just because I think the colors are bolder and brighter. Distress Oxides are pigment inks, and so they dry back a bit. For the brushes, I have a 1-inch flat brush, and then I am using a number 2 and a number 4. These are also from Altenew. You can use whatever brushes you like, but then know when you're going into it and putting your water down that the pigment, so the ink, the color, is going to flow wherever the moisture is. So wherever you put the water is where your pigment will flow. If you do not want an area to have watercolor on it, don't get that area wet. If you accidentally get it wet, make sure it is dry before you go in and start applying color. So then from here, I'm using the number 4 brush. This is my base layer. I do like a flowier watercolor. Not everybody does, and that's fine. If you want a more controlled watercolor, you can skip to the next step. But I do like a flowy underpainting. I like when it goes out past my edges and it's just kind of very soft. I find watercolor to be the prettiest when it is doing that. When I'm putting my color down, you'll notice I'm just kind of dropping it or tapping it in, and then I'm moving on. I am not overworking it. So I am not continually, I have sped this up now that we've dropped in a couple of colors. You don't want to be mixing them. You're going to end up with one note of color, which is in this case, like we're having more of like a rainbow type floral. That's not what we're going for. If I wanted to mix them all together and have one color, then I would have just done one color. But oftentimes having self-control with these types of watercolor cards is where we run into the problem. So it's ugly right now. It's really ugly. It's not going to hurt my feelings. You're probably looking at it thinking like, girl, this ain't it. And that's fine, because every watercolor goes through an ugly stage. Okay. It's like the ugly duckling turning into the swan. That's every watercolor project you're going to work on. But at some point you have to stop and let it do its thing, because what you end up with is an overworked project that you're not happy with either. So when it is here to this stage where everything's kind of flowing and doing its thing, you've dropped in all the colors you want it to drop in, then just leave it. Just leave it alone. Here I'm adding in the teal just to kind of darken it up. Now, normally I wouldn't necessarily do this. I would let it dry. But for the sake of the live stream, I didn't really have a choice. I needed to expedite the drying process. So I put a paper towel over it and blotted it up. Obviously, the pigment is still there. It's just not as intense. And then I am going to dry this with my heat tool. In order to get it flat, I'm going to dry the back and the front. And then I can go back in and do my second layer. So now with the second layer, this is where we're paying attention to the details. So I've refreshed all of my inks over there on the right-hand side. And this is where the two brush method comes in. So I am going to be laying down the water with the number 4 brush, and then I will be laying down the pigment with the number 2. When you are laying down your water, you want it to be slightly damp. If you feel like you have too much water or you don't know how to control your water, which is very common, just blot the base of the bristles off on a paper towel. Then lay your water down. You want it to add moisture, but it should not be bubbled up. It should just have a slight sheen. Then you can pick up your pigment and drop it in where you want it to be the darkest. In this case, we want our pigment to be the darkest where it is meeting the center of the flower, or where it is coming out from behind another petal. So I'm wetting down the whole petal, and then I'm adding the pigment where I want it to be the darkest. Now, there are other illustration lines that are drawn to give the petals more of a roughly movement. These are peonies. Peonies are very roughly. And so there are sometimes when I am adding a little bit of pigment to the tips where those little lines are, but I'm not adding a ton. So the first time I'm going through this, I'm just adding down the pink. Now, I wouldn't necessarily always do it this way. I would do I like a lot of color variety. So I would do the pink and maybe the purple, or the pink and the orange. But I wanted to show you that even if you only go back in with one color, okay, even if we only go back in with the pink, the underpainting, the part that we put down to begin with, the oranges, the purples, the pinks, even though we're only going back in and adding our dimension with our pinks, you can still see the underpainting. It is very translucent. Distress inks are dye inks, which means that they are water-based. So I use distress inks because I like the color family, and also I've invested quite a bit of money into my distress inks, and I've used them for years. So you can just use that one color and it will lay on top of each other, and you'll be able to see all the colors underneath. So now I've sped this up again. I'm going in and I'm adding more dimension with other colors. So you can see I dropped in some wilted violet to make those other colors a little bit darker. Here I'm adding in some carved pumpkin for the petals that are closest to the center. Again, just creating that color variation, which I very much enjoy. But you could just do the pink if you wanted. Now, for the center of the flower, I'm doing the pinks and the yellows, but I'm not getting as much dimension as I want. So what I'm doing here is I'm mixing orange with blue. Orange and blue are complementary colors, and so you can create a tint or a tone with the other colors by mixing them together. And you can see already, once I put that color down, that I get a ton more dimension because I've knocked back that orange. And then I went over top of it with the orange. So if it feels like it's a little too blue, then just go over top of it with the orange. I'm going to do this again later with the pink and the yellow green because they're complements as well. If you are interested in learning more about color theory and how to mix your colors and pair colors and things like that, I do have a course on that available over on my website. The bundle is still on sale. So anywho, now once that is done, I'm going to move on to my leaves. And for my leaves, I've done a combination of greens, blues, and blue-greens. So here, oh, this is another trick. So here, I did get a little bit of teal into my pink flower. Rinse off your brush, dry it off, so it's just damp. And then you can go in and use it as an eraser. So I just went right over top of where that green went seeped into my pink petal, and it just pulls it all up. And those are like little things that you can, watercolor is so forgiving if you know the little tips and tricks to make yourself successful. So for this one here, this little bud, my stem is very much blending into the leaf that is behind it. And so this is another one that's where I'm going to use those complementary colors to create some separation there. I'm going to knock out these other leaves first. And again, just adding those blues, teals, greens, just to create some color variation. You could do this with like 3 colors, okay? A yellow for the center, a pink for the flower, and then a green for the leaf. I just like that rainbow colored kind of look. I feel like it's more of a wow factor. And these cards are for I already gave them to them. They were for my sisters for Mother's Day. So here is, I know it's hard to see because it's kind of off screen, but I'm mixing the pink and the green together. And then I'm going to put this on the leaf so that it pushes the leaf back and brings the stem forward. So see how it kind of creates almost like an olivey color? And that's just by mixing the 2 complements, because the mowed lawn that I'm using is very bright, but in order for it to compete with, or to stop competing with the stem, I'm going to change its hue so that it pushes it back to the background. It's more what we call desaturated. And so then the brighter stem will come forward. So then once I put on the little details, you can see this is the difference between the underpainting with the detail work or just the underpainting. And there's quite a bit of a difference. Both are pretty, but they're pretty differently. Now, you know me, I'm a total cheap chicken. Here's both of the flowers painted. I have all of this ink left over. And so I'm just going to spray it down. I'm going to take another piece of watercolor paper and I'm just going to dip this right in here. I'm going to add some more water and I'm going to dip it back in until I'm happy with it. And then we'll probably see these, you can see how it got kind of yucky, kind of brown there. I just blotted it up with either a paper towel or a rag. And then that way it's not ugly. And then we're going to move on to the next one. So I did the same thing with the heat embossing. I just changed the design of the flowers. They're the same flowers. And now we're going to use the Oxides and we're going to talk about what the difference is. Now, I do want to be very clear that both are pretty. They're pretty differently. It depends on the look that you're going for. So here, instead of using the 1-inch brush, I wanted to show you, you can also use a spray bottle and then move that pigment around or move that clean water around with the paintbrush before you add your pigment. And then here I'm going in and I'm doing my underpainting. Already right out the gate, you can tell these are more opaque. They look thicker. They are not as translucent because they have that pigment ink property. And so because of that, our painting is not going to look as light. It's not going to look as airy, but it does offer better coverage. So if you're looking for something that is going to be a more solid painting, here I was getting pigment where I didn't love it and I'm blotting it up. You can tell with these ones, they stain almost immediately. So it is harder to pick them up if you get ink where you don't want it. But with these types of paintings, for me personally, because I'm like, hey, I love all the color variation, color everywhere, colors for you, colors for you, colors for you. I don't have to worry about it as much because I really don't care where the color goes. But just know that they stain almost immediately and they're a little bit more challenging to pick up. Not impossible, but you do have to like wet the area with clean water, blot it, wet the area with clean water, blot it again with a clean section of paper towel, and you just have to work it a little bit more if you're interested in picking it up completely clean. So now, obviously this is sped up again, and we're just going in and dropping these in. When I was doing the live stream and somebody was like, hey, could you do this with Oxides? I was like, you know what? I would love to be able to show the difference. And so that's how I got the idea for the video. And I think that it's important to know that the products that you have, you can do similar, like you don't have to buy what everybody else has. You can do similar things with the things that you already own. So for the distress inks, if you like that look, any dye ink that you have, that will work with that. They're water-based. So like Altenews Fresh Dye inks, who else? Gina K, Hero Arts. But then on the flip side, if you like the look of the Oxides, you're going to want a pigment ink. So if you don't have distressed oxides, but you like the look of this one, you like that it's more solid, and there's less like breaks. It doesn't breathe as much. Here's another example right there of where it doesn't necessarily pick up as clean. I got some of that teal color into my pink petal and blotted it up, and you can still see it. For me, I'm not mad about it. I don't care. So here I blotted it like I did before, and then we're going to heat it up for the sake of time. You could let this air dry, and these do dry back a lot softer. So then now we're going to go back in and do that additional detail. This is very much sped up, where I'm going to be adding in the pinks and the purples and the oranges and all of that jazz. But this is the thing, okay? Because they have the pigment properties and because they dry back softer, okay? They dry back almost like chalky. You cannot get the same amount of depth and dimension with an oxide watercolor that you can with a distress ink. Now, that doesn't, if you're not going for that look, that's not a negative. That's fine. You can get some depth and dimension. You have to do it a little bit differently, and I'll show you that when we get closer to the end of the painting. But just doing what we did before, where we're just kind of like dropping it in, that's not going to get you that nice depth dimension separation. It's just because it lays on top of each other. This is why people buy distress inks, because ink blending is so much easier with them. They stay wet longer, they blend nicer, and they lay on top of each other. So you don't have colors necessarily mixing together. You have them layering together. Whereas distress inks, because they are translucent, they layer, but you can see the other color underneath. They mix more. So for these, because we have that pigment ink, the layers aren't really translucent at all. You can't really see what's underneath. So you can kind of build up the opacity, but it's very difficult to build up the darkness because they do dry back so much softer. So I'm going to do the same thing I did, adding those different, layers of color. I still like the way that this one came out, and I designed them like when I was putting the cards together, I intentionally made them to be sisters, not twins, because they are for my sisters. So here, this is the first way that I tried it. I tried going back in and adding a little bit of color just by itself. And here is where I finally started to get a little bit of dimension. I put no water down beforehand. This is paint. This is wet on dry. So my paper is dry, my pigment is wet. And then I rinsed off my brush, I dried it, so it was just barely damp at the tip. So base, you want to blot the base of the bristles. And then I smoothed that ink out into the rest of the petal. So this is a little bit more challenging to get that depth and dimension, because you have to put it in dry, but it is achievable. It just takes a little bit more work. Whereas I feel like with the distress ink, it does not take as much work. So to each their own, whichever one you have, I would say use that and practice with that before you move on to something else. Here, I did the same thing where I mixed the two complementary colors so that I would have a little bit more darkness in the orange and the blue, and that worked just as well. It just was, I think, a little bit darker. So here I'm doing like the dipping so that we don't use the inks. And then right away, you can see on the right-hand side, like everything is getting very brown. So it did take me a minute to kind of dip and blot and dip until I was happy with what I had. But here's how they ended up. The Distress Oxide on the left, the Distress Ink on the right. You can totally see which one's more like light and airy. And then here are the paintings. The Distress Oxide on the left and the Distress Ink on the right. Again, both really beautiful, but they do look different. For the sentiments, I went with the heart of our family because it has the sister sentiment in there. And then, so it has like different as mom, sister, grandma. I used it a lot this year, honestly. So I went with sister to a woman who makes makes life more beautiful. I thought that one was really great. And then to the the world is brighter because you're in it. And then I cut them out. I did do this on the same watercolor paper, so the whites would be the same, just full transparency. And then for the Oxide one, I trimmed it down a little bit. My middle sister's favorite color is purple, so I was giving her a nice purple border to go with her flowers. I also stamped her sentiment in purple, and this is the lilac paper from Spellbinders. So I glued that on there, and then the middle section where those leaves are open was like the perfect spot to put her sentiment. So I put those on there, and there are dies for the peonies. I just didn't use them for these 2 cards. You could do like a soft watercolor painting, color them with Copics and put it over the watercolor. There's lots of things that you could do. And then I used the rainbow rhinestones to accent the sentiments. I did this on both cards. And then I also used a clear glitter pen to add more shimmer to the flowers. This can reactivate your inks, so just be aware how much like scrubbing that you're doing. And then this is it. So this is the Distress ink version, and then the Distress Oxide. Let me know which one is your favorite in the comments, or if you'd like to see more videos like this. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I always appreciate your time, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.